Consent the pending amendment be set aside and call up Amendment 4214, and I thank the distinguished managers of the bill.
Without objection, so ordered.
Madam President,
the senator from Arizona, Mr. McCain, proposes an amendment numbered 4214.
I ask unanimous consent that further reading of the amendment be
Without objection.
Madam President, the amendment would fund the immediate deployment of 6,000 National Guard troops to the U.S.-Mexico border to provide additional security since the situation on the border has greatly deteriorated during the last 18 months, and the National Guard troops would remain on the border until the Secretary of Defense, in consultation with the governors of Arizona, California, New Mexico, and Texas, determines that the federal government has achieved, quote, operational control of the border. Now, Madam President, since I put this amendment together, we've been informed that the President will be asking for an additional $500 million to support border security and up to 1,200 National Guard to the border. I appreciate that. I think that it is a recognition of the violence on the border, which has been really beyond description in some respects, particularly on the Mexico side. I appreciate the additional 1,200 being sent of the Guard, as well as additional $500 million. But it's simply not enough. We need 6,000. We need 3,000 across the border, an additional 3,000 National Guard troops to the Arizona-Mexico border. And Madam President, I say that because of my many visits to the border, my conversations with the Border Patrol, and the time it will take to train an additional 3,000 troops just for the Arizona-Mexico border. Now, I have colleagues waiting with other amendments, but I hope that my colleagues appreciate the extent of the violence on the Mexican border and the dramatic increase in that violence that's taken place over the last several years. There was a time not that long ago that someone who wanted to come across our border illegally could do so if they were fortunate and would come across by themselves. That's no longer possible. We now have highly organized human smuggling rings and drug cartels that are working together. They are using the same routes, and unfortunately, the so-called Central Corridor, the Arizona-Mexico border, has been where a great degree of violence and certainly a preponderance or majority of human smuggling and drug smuggling. I'd refer to my colleagues two numbers. Last year, in the Tucson sector of the Arizona-Mexico border, was over 1,200 million pounds of marijuana intercepted on that border, to the point where I was told that the U.S. Attorney didn't prosecute anything less than 500 pounds of marijuana intercepted. One other number. Last year in the Tucson sector of the Arizona-Mexico border, 241,000 illegal immigrants were apprehended trying to cross the Mexico-Arizona border. If you figure that we catch 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5 illegal immigrants who are coming across, that's about 1 million people. 1 million illegal immigrants coming across the Tucson sector, destroying people's property, destroying our wildlife refuges, and causing an environment of insecurity amongst the citizens who live in the southern part of my state. Now, Madam President, I understand the controversy associated with the legislation that was passed by the Arizona legislature and signed by the governor. And by the way, that legislation is less severe than federal law, certainly nothing like the Mexican law regarding treatment of illegal immigrants, and it has been badly mischaracterized by administration officials who have admitted that they haven't even read the bill. But the important aspect here is I support that legislation because the Arizona governor and legislature acted in frustration because of the federal government's failure to carry out its responsibilities to secure our border. Again, 1.2 million pounds of marijuana, 241,000 illegal immigrants, and then the situation is compounded by the incredible violence. 22,000 Mexican citizens have been murdered on the Mexican side of the border in the last 3 years in the struggle between the drug cartels and the Mexican government and the drug cartels. Now, it was predicted by many of us as we saw this violence increase and that it was sooner or later it was going to spill over the border or affect American citizens. 3 American citizens were killed on the Mexican side of the border as they made their way home to the United States. In March, a third-generation Arizona rancher was found dead on his property near the Mexican border, reportedly shot by a suspect that may have illegally entered our country. So the point is that this violence is at such a level that it makes a compelling argument for us to secure our border. Now, I understand that the liberal media and the mainstream media who have talked about our situation in Arizona, most of them have never been within about 100 miles of the border. But the point is that the citizens in my state deserve the right to live a secure existence, not to be threatened, not to have their property overrun, not to have their homes broken into, not to have as a mother came to me at a town hall meeting and said, I'm afraid to drop my children off at the school bus stop. And so this violence on the border is unspeakable. It is one of the least reported aspects of this whole issue, and I still am puzzled as to why. People are beheaded and their bodies hung in the overpass in Tijuana. A wedding took place not long ago, and the drug people came in and took the groom, his brother, and a nephew, and their bodies were found a few hours later. A young man who was part of the capture of one of these drug lords was lionized by the Mexican government, and his whole family was murdered. This is a degree of brutality that threatens the very existence of the Mexican government. And I'm proud that we are working with the Mexican government. And all of our colleagues, I hope, understand that we have spent over $1 billion in Plan Merida. But the corruption level that exists in Mexico today, it reaches to the highest levels of government. And so really the only institution that the government can rely on is the Army. Now, when we send the Guard to the border, we are told that the presence of the Guard has an effect on these drug cartels, by the way, who are watching everything on the border, who have the most sophisticated communications, who have sophisticated intelligence capability, and they are very, very efficient in their organization. So the Guard troops on the border in the past have had a very salutary effect. And that's why we need 6,000 of them until such time as we can train up additional Border Patrol and Customs people to address this issue. So I want to emphasize to my colleagues that we should not forget to start with that it is the United States of America that's creating the demand for these drugs, and at some point we have got to address that issue too. But in the meantime, this violence that's taking place in Mexico, on the Mexican side of the border, which has spilled over on our side, can only get worse until these drug cartels are brought under control and the human smugglers are brought under control, and that will only take place when our border is secure. And we can secure the border. The Yuma sector, as my colleague from Arizona has pointed out, they have taken measures, including incarceration of illegal immigrants, including increased fencing and surveillance. And by the way, UAVs are a very important part of this equation. So we have been able to drastically reduce the illegal activity, both drug and human smuggling, in the Yuma sector of the border. My colleague from Texas will testify that in, I believe it's the McAllen sector of Texas, there has been significant and dramatic improvement. In San Diego, there is dramatic improvement. So those who feel that we can't secure our border, then there are great examples of our ability to do so with people, with fences, and with technology. We can do these things. And we've got to get an additional 6,000 troops to the border before there is more tragedies, such as happened with Rob Krentz, the rancher from Arizona, or the deputy all the way up in Pinal County, some 50 miles from the border, who was shot in the stomach in pursuit of one of these drug people with an AK-47. So I urge my colleagues, and I urge all Americans to understand that we in Arizona didn't want to have this law passed by the legislature. It was done out of frustration because of the federal government's failure to exercise its responsibility. It is a federal responsibility, something that when the Secretary of Homeland Security emphasized in a letter when she was governor of the state of Arizona in March 11, 2008, says clearly this Operation Jumpstart has been highly effective, on and on, about how important that the help in ensuring the border and bringing the Guard to the border has been. That is true today. So the Arizona legislature and governor did not wish to pass this legislation. It was an act because the people of Arizona had an insecure border and live, in many cases, in an insecure environment. An obligation we have to all of our citizens to allow them to live in a secure environment. And so we can, and by the way, this law that the Arizona legislature passed is far less severe in many respects than the federal law, and certainly far different from the law in Mexico, which is very stringent in its provisions and penalties for illegal immigration. So we need relief in our state. We need relief in many places across the border. The drug cartels have got to be stopped. And working with Mexico, we can, over time, I believe, bring the border under control and rid the scourge of these drug cartels and these human smugglers. And let me just finally say it, because I know my colleagues are waiting. The treatment of human beings by these coyotes, these human smugglers, is atrocious, unspeakable. They take them and they pack them into, well, there was a U-Haul rental truck the other day apprehended 67 human beings were packed inside. They take them into these drop houses, they hold them for ransom, then after their ransom sometimes they mistreat them even further. The human rights abuses that are taking place in these human smuggling rings are atrocious beyond description. That alone should compel us to get our border secure and to provide for a legal system of immigration into our country. We welcome immigrants. We welcome our Hispanic heritage. We cherish it. Spanish was spoken in our state of Arizona before English was. But we have got to get the human smuggling and drug cartels under control, because the security of our citizens and our nation depends on it. So I urge my colleagues to support the amendment, and I yield the floor.